I'm doing this video to try to help doctors who have been thinking about getting into real estate or are evaluating real estate on both the leasing side and also on the purchase side, and try to help them with everything that I've learned year to date on the deals that I've done, and try to help them essentially get a faster path to understanding what drives deals and what makes them attractive and really what makes them not attractive so that they're avoiding heartache, which unfortunately, when you're starting off in real estate can easily happen. I usually say this to doctors that usually the first real estate deal you do is really just to learn. The second one is to break even and figure out what drives the profitability of it. And really, you don't start making money, good money, until the third one where you've kind of figured things out. And it's tough for doctors to continue on the third, fourth, fifth deal because real estate takes a lot of work and it also requires you to push past the experiences you've had where it was tough on deal one and it was a little easier on deal two, but by then you can be in a situation where you feel exhausted. So the idea of this video is to help you learn as much as you can before making your own mistakes, and so that deal one is maybe break even, hopefully profitable, and deal two and three and so on are a lot more profitable. So a lot of the the tools that I use would be calculator.net. It's a really nice website that has a lot of calculators that you can use for evaluating deals. I use this loan calculator all the time where you can see amortization tables, which is really important, and you can see your payment and things like that. Another thing would be some of the websites where you can actually look for, let's call them MLS listed real estate, which for commercial real estate would be loopnet.com or crexi.com. So it would be good for you to go in and create potentially account using your open and affordable doctor email. And then it allows you to save certain filters so that you don't have to search for the same thing. And you kind of dial that in so that you have a better, you're going to get alerts daily if a new deal comes in the geographical area that you're looking at. And so it just helps you kind of hone in on, where deals are. Another good place or another good calculator or tool that I have created is this deal evaluator. So for every single property that I own, I put in all of these parameters, which are found in these yellow blocks, similar to everything else that we've created, so that you can evaluate the deal with numbers instead of just kind of a gut instinct. So that's one thing that I'll go over a little bit more. Another place to find deals is on the State Dental Association websites. So a lot of times dental brokers will post one of the practices for sale or a lease takeover or real estate deal on there because obviously they're trying to sell it. So the thing is obviously like everything else in dentistry, it's a relationship game. So it's good to make relationship with these brokers and follow up with them and just kind of constantly be in their line of sight if hey they've got a great deal and before they maybe offer it off to other people they might think of you and get you in line first. So it's really important to make relationships with those dental brokers. The other thing too would be just straight commercial real estate brokers. I've created relationships with several of them too. And when I'm looking at a deal and they'll go out and do a lot of the work and they can also send you lists on just straight, you know, real estate deals that maybe don't have a practice or maybe they were an old practice that were shut down. Sometimes they'll get some that have the practice inside of it. So those are other sources of deal flow. So I wanted to go over some terms and it's very similar to dentistry in that there's a lot of terms that you are not familiar with and it is very good for you to start understanding all of these terms so that you can talk and understand what exactly is going on. The first term that you're going to really hear a lot about is this word underwrite. And to me, underwrite used to seem like it meant, oh, I am going to go in there and get this deal ready for the bank. But in reality, what underwrite means is to basically for yourself, you want to go and underwrite a deal. So how do you personally underwrite a deal? What you're going to do is you're going to take all of the information that is given to you and you're going to calculate the value and the risk of owning something. So in this case, it's real estate. And it's basically saying under what conditions does this transaction make sense? So you're going to hear this term, maybe even on YouTube. Hey, I'm going to make you underwrite the deal. That's great. I'm going to go in and evaluate the deal to make sure it makes sense for me. A super important concept here is understanding how to make money in real estate, okay? And a lot of people talk about 4 ways to make money in real estate, but really there's 5 ways to make money in real estate. The most common way, or the way that most people think that they're going to make money in real estate, is through cash flow. So cash flow obviously is the amount of money that you have left over after paying all of the expenses. And obviously we're usually talking about either monthly or yearly cash flow. The thing that you have to understand about real estate is that there's different types of taxes, and we'll go over that a little bit in the future. But cash flow is going to be taxed at earned income rates, okay? So it's very important to understand that cash flow is going to be taxed kind of at the highest income rates, okay? And you're going to kind of understand throughout this entire presentation that real estate really becomes a way for us to have a very inflation-proof savings account for the hopefully high incomes that we have. And hopefully this savings account is also a way to reduce the tax liability. And, as my income started going higher as I got further into my dental career, really I was searching high and low on ways to reduce that tax liability. And it always came back to real estate. And that's how a lot of medical doctors and a lot of high income earners are able to reduce income. Yes, there's ways that you can do, kind of other little strategies, but none of them were big enough to make a real difference in your tax liability as much as real estate. So appreciation. So appreciation obviously is the amount that the property increases in value. Now, appreciation is never taxed because there's no there's no tax event. There's no sale. It's just how much your property increases, and you aren't taxed on that until you sell the real estate. And even when you do sell them, it's taxed at capital gains rates, okay? So we'll talk more about the capital gains tax rates in just a little bit, but understand that there's different tax rates. You have your earned income rates, the highest ones. You have your capital gains rates, those are lower. And even if you do sell them, it's not always guaranteed that you're going to have to pay capital gains because there's other ways to get out of or to delay paying those capital gain taxes, okay? Now, within appreciation, I've kind of divided it into 2 ways that you're going to get appreciation. One is active, meaning you are actively working to increase the value of your property, okay? And a lot of times people will call that the value add. So what's the value add opportunity in this property? So you are actively investing in the property using capital expenditures to increase the property. And what are capital expenditures? We'll go over that, but it's basically money that you're putting into your building that is on things that are going to last more than a year, okay? Now, the passive appreciation is simply if you bought a property and you did absolutely nothing and you would see that property value increase. Okay. Now, if you start to really think about what your real estate is worth against currency, in our case, the US dollar, a lot of times you're going to find out that the real definition of inflation is that one asset or goods is increasing at versus another. Okay, so in some senses, you feel like yes, the price of housing is going up, but you could also conversely interpret that as the house is actually not going up in value, but the other item that it's being judged against is actually going down in value. So it would probably be a good idea for you to kind of put that into your head that it's an increasing value of property based on a currency devaluation. Okay. So, really in 10 years, let's say that you bought a house and it went, like what we're trained to believe is it goes up in value over 10 years and it's worth double. Okay. What in reality is it's you're not able to go out and now take that one house and buy two houses in reality because the houses are still worth the same. It's just the value of the dollar went down. Okay. Now, obviously, there are situations where, let's say that you bought a house out in the middle of nowhere, and then all of a sudden there are a ton of new housing developments that go around you, and now your property is worth more because it has access to more goods and services. In that case, yes, there's regional location changes that will bring the value of your property up. But a lot of most passive increases in property values, especially if you just go and buy a cookie cutter house, it's mostly because the value of the currency is being devalued. Okay. And that's super important, especially if you're investing in high inflation countries where they really understand that inflation is just a devaluation of their currency. One of the other ways that you are going to save in by investing in real estate is through tax savings, okay? And there's certain ways that you need to use to qualify to really get the big tax savings that we as high income earners are going to need in order to really make the difference in, deciding to purchase real estate versus leasing it. And these options, really aren't these deals that we get into aren't as attractive to, let's say, just a low income worker, or because they aren't going to feel the great tax savings that a high income worker earner will have. So tax savings, and usually it's in the form of depreciation expenses, which are essentially phantom expenses that can offset our earned income. Okay. The final way that we're going to make money in real estate is by slowly paying down the principal on our loan. Okay. So obviously, let's say every month we get a check for $5,000 for our lease, and we have, let's say, a $5,000 mortgage payment. A certain portion of that, maybe $1,000, is for principal pay down, and over the life of our real estate, eventually it will be completely paid off and we will own 100% of our property. And then the cash flow will increase significantly. So obviously the principal paydown is not taxed at all and it goes up slowly. One of the things that in the deal evaluator that I really like is that I look at all of those different ways to make money, and I calculate the return on investment during different years on the life of the property. And then I come down here in this particular instance, so we'll go over this. You can see the ROI, or return on investment percentage, by each one of those types of ways to make money. Okay, so obviously maybe tax reduction is high in year one, then that drops, and then your principal pay down is kind of steady, and then you can see here after the property is paid off, then the cash flow becomes higher on the return on investment. So it's important to kind of evaluate this, and that's what's nice about this calculator is it's going to kind of take everything that we're learning tonight and put in this. So I've created one of these for myself and some of my other essentially real estate friends. If they want a copy of this, we just create one for them, and then they start building their deals off of this. So with the deal evaluator spreadsheet, okay, obviously we talked about this. It has, the ways to evaluate, how much money is coming in. It kind of shows you how much that we can plan on spending money per month. It also kind of sets up what the loan is and how much we're planning on spending to get the deal in operation, and then also, what we're going to do afterwards. It also puts a valuation on the building, and you can kind of update that in real time. It also kind of goes over the depreciation schedule, which we'll go over, and then it also kind of evaluates the return on investment. I've also included this little checklist on things that we can do to actively increase the value of our real estate. And this has kind of been gained from a lot of books that I've read and a lot of videos that I've watched. It also has the amortization schedule over here to kind of see, what your principal pay down is going to be every single month. And then also kind of your rent roll here on how much money is to be expected to be received. So it's a super good tool, and we'll go over it just a little bit. One thing to understand is that all finance, in a sense, is a type of arbitrage. And what is arbitrage? Arbitrage is basically saying I can buy one thing over here and for one price, and I can sell it over here, the exact same thing, for a different price. And if you really kind of think about what finance is, and that could be anything, even like a dental office, we are arbitraging our ability to gather staff, gather doctors, gather a building, and the cost of that is basically our monthly expenses, right? Yet we are able to sell that service for a lot more than what it cost us. Okay, so someone who comes in and pays us for a $1,200 crown, obviously that costs us a lot less than $1,200 to make, and that's why we have arbitrage. Okay, so it's basically important to kind of understand that, because in the real estate realm, it's also how much can we acquire this lease for, or how much can we acquire this property for, and how much can we turn around and lease it to someone else for, and can we acquire it and have a monthly payment less than, or the combination of any of those 5 ways to make money in real estate, less than what we can lease it out for. Okay, or conversely, if I lease this out, is it cheaper for me to lease it out than it would be for me to buy it, and so forth. So it's important to understand this concept about finance and what it really is. Okay, so as far as the income tax or the taxes, it's good that we kind of understand what those are. So earned income is, by IRS definitions, is the money that you make in exchange for the work that you do. So for most of us, or for most people, almost all of the money that they make is earned income. Imagine all of those W-2 workers, they go to their job and then they get a paycheck, and that is essentially trading time for money or skills for money, and it's earned income. So any money that they get from professional wages, even tips, is counted as earned income. So, even reimbursements from your employer for travel expenses, meals, accommodation, it's also counted as an earned income. True alimony, earned income. So it's important to understand that you're going to be paying essentially your personal income tax rate on that earned income. Unearned income Unearned income, conversely, is the money that you make without having performed a professional service. Okay, so it would involve, interest, dividends, capital gains, and some account or retirement account distributions, annuities, unemployment compensation, Social Security benefits, gambling winnings. Okay, some other forms of income, such as money from real estate, a trust, or partnership, may be considered unearned income, meaning you aren't trading time for money, you are investing in things, or you're getting money from some other type of compensation. Okay, so on earned income, you are going to pay payroll taxes. Okay, and that includes Social Security and Medicare taxes. Okay, I'm going to call this FICA. Okay, so you've all heard of the word FICA. It's basically Social Security and Medicare taxes. So, and on top of that, you're going to also pay federal and state income taxes. So, as a W-2 earner, okay, you are going to pay 7.5% of your earned income to FICA. Your employer will pay 7.5% to FICA. And then on top of there, you will pay your earned income, personal income tax rate, which is between 0 and 37%, depending on how much you make. And then you will also pay a state income tax depending on how much you make and which state you live in. So, for example, in the state of Florida, there's no state income taxes. I think that's the same in Texas and a few other states. In Colorado, it's around 4.5%. Okay, so the federal government obviously is going to deduct the payroll taxes from your paycheck, and you are required to pay up to, as soon as you start earning above 168,600 in 2024, you are no longer required to pay FICA taxes on your earned income. So there's that cap on everyone up to 168,600 in 2024 is paying FICA taxes. Above that amount, you don't have to pay the FICA taxes, okay? And obviously those go to fund Medicare and Social Security, okay? Unearned income works differently than earned income. You don't have to pay any payroll taxes, including Social Security and Medicare, on any forms of unearned income. So you're not going to have to pay the FICA taxes on any of that, okay? So the other thing too is we talked about this capital gain taxes, okay? Capital gains taxes are, and with the unearned income, let's go back up here. With unearned income, usually you're going to pay that at your personal marginal tax rate, okay? But there's certain cases, for example, with capital gains, that you're in a different type of tax, okay? And with that, if you make a certain amount, you're going to only pay 15% on, let's say that you buy a house and you don't live in it, it's just an investment. On your earned income side, you make less than 39,000, you're going to only pay 15%. If you make more than 450,000, you're going to pay 20% on that, okay? So it's important to understand what type of thing you're doing and how much taxes you're going to pay, okay? So with capital gains taxes, again, let's just think about it as a different bucket of tax type. That is also divided into short-term capital gains and long-term capital gains. Short-term capital gains are taxes on the profits of assets sold and held less than a year. They are taxed at the ordinary income tax bracket, with the highest being 37, okay? If you hold an asset for longer than 1 year, then they are taxed at a maximum of 20. Okay, we talked about this whole 15% if you earn below this amount, but at maximum, you're going to be taxed at 20%. Okay, the thing that's important to understand here is that very quickly you're going to understand that this earned income is taxed three times. It's taxed with the FICA tax, it's taxed at the federal level, and then it's taxed at the state level. So it's almost like a disincentive to stay in this realm of income. Now, is it easy to have unearned income? No, you have to invest a lot in order to have unearned income. But when people are starting out and they're in, let's say, the lower to mid tier of income, you're mostly having this earned income, which is taxed very heavily. Okay, so once you're able to get into capital gains, you're actually taxed less than if you were in earned income. So another concept you're going to hear a lot of in real estate is the pro forma. Okay, so the pro forma is either created by you or sometimes it's given to you by the broker or by the seller. Okay, and essentially a pro forma is what the numbers would look like with a certain set of assumptions. And if it is given to you by the real estate agent or the seller, it will be with the assumption that everything is going to work out perfectly. So, you might say your seller broker might say, "Hey, let me send you over a pro forma," and you're like, "Oh, awesome! Thank you so much for doing all that work for me." Well, what they're going to do is they're going to make this deal look so amazing that it's like, "Of course I'm going to do it." When in reality, you need to be super big on creating your own pro forma so that you can come up with more realistic expectations. Okay. So obviously, they're going to show you how profitable the transaction will be, and they will include assumptions that, like the whole property is going to be fully leased and that all the expenses are going to be super cheap and there's no need for repairs of anything, when in reality, there's going to be a lot of capital expenses and repairs and things like that. Okay. So in the real estate realm, there is this thing that I've already alluded to, which is called depreciation expense. Okay, depreciation expense is essentially taking the portion of your property that eventually loses value and assigning a mathematical formula to calculate how much that particular portion of your property loses value per year. Okay, so in a higher level example here, if you bought a house, okay, we can assume that that same house, if you did nothing to it, would crumble and essentially be completely worthless after a certain amount of time. I think you would agree that there's not a lot of houses out there that are 100 years old that you are dying to live in, okay? So they definitely lose value, okay? You have to also understand that the land under those houses usually doesn't lose value and it might actually increase in value. So when you're talking about depreciation expense as far as the IRS is concerned, they have set out exact parameters on the property type and how much it depreciates per year. And they also say you can't depreciate the land value. So what they would do is they'll say, okay, how much did you buy the property for? For example, let's say you bought a commercial real estate that cost $1 million, and they're going to calculate how much of that was in the land value and how much of that was in the actual structure value. They'll take the structure value and then they will depreciate that or show you how much that you will be able to write off over their defined time frame. Okay, so if it is all equal, meaning it's losing the same amount of value per year, it's called straight line depreciation. Okay, if it is, let's say the first 5 years it depreciates more and then it kind of tapers off a little bit, that is called accelerated depreciation, where the large chunk of the depreciation happens up at the front of the depreciation schedule versus at the, equally across, okay? So in the real estate realm, there's two ways for you to get by this situation where the IRS does not allow you, a normal person, to use depreciation expense to offset earned income. Okay. The two exceptions to that are if you own and manage a short term rental, or you are deemed a real estate professional by the IRS, okay? And we're going to talk about the certain statuses or certain requirements it takes to get qualified for that. But the big takeaway here is, in order to reduce earned income with real estate, you need to qualify to allow this depreciation expense, which is not an outlay of cash, it's just a phantom expense, to reduce your earned income. Okay. So moving on to the types of leases here, you're going to hear, this term called, it's just a normal lease or a gross lease. Okay. The reason why gross leases are super common is because they happen mostly with residential real estate. So if you think about when you rented your first apartment, the rent was $1,200 a month, and there were some expenses. It was usually utilities and maybe a parking garage. Okay. But you weren't expected to pay for any maintenance on the, if there was a leak in the kitchen, it's on the landlord. If there was property taxes, you probably didn't even know that there was such thing as property taxes when you first got out of high school, but it was included in the price of the lease. So gross lease means basically bundling all of those expenses, and there's only one number essentially that goes to the tenant, okay? In the world of commercial real estate, it's a lot different. In commercial real estate, it's kind of set up where the landlord owns the exterior portion of the building, and there can be a lot of uses for the interior portion of the building. And so really the tenant owns almost everything inside of the building and is responsible for all of those expenses. And they could also be including maintenance on the exterior, taxes, property taxes, and even insurance premiums on the entire building. Okay. So with there's these things called a double net lease and a triple net lease. Okay. So essentially there's three primary property expenses: the property taxes, the maintenance and utilities, and the insurance premiums. Okay. So in a double net lease, pick two of those three, but the tenant would be responsible for those. With triple net leases, the lease is set up so that the tenant is responsible for all of those particular things. Okay. So triple net leases on the landlord side, all of these leases are basically set up to decide who takes on the risk. Okay. So if you are a property landlord, it is super predictable how much money you're going to receive and how much expenditures you're going to receive if you have a triple net lease. If you are a tenant, you're kind of liking the gross leases because you know that your apartment is only going to cost $1,200 a month. If something breaks, you're not going to have a bigger expense. Okay. So it's kind of like a spectrum on risk here. Triple net leases are much less risky for landlords, and a gross lease is more risky for landlords. A triple net lease is more risky for tenants, and a gross lease is less risky for tenants. So with the commercial leases, there is also something called common area maintenance, which is, they call it CAM, which is basically the cost to take care of common areas for all of, if you have a multi-unit space, the common areas, maybe the elevator, parking lots, hallways, lobbies, exterior landscaping, shared facilities like restrooms and fitness centers. Okay. So that's one term that you need to understand. Capitalization expense. Okay, we talked about this briefly before. Capitalization expense is any cost that the business incurs to acquire, enhance, or create assets that are expected to provide an economic benefit beyond 1 year. Okay, so a capitalization expense could include something, it's going to go on the company's balance sheet. It's not going to be written off as an expense. But, it could be like a new elevator. That would be a capitalization expense. It could be a new furnace, okay? Something like, you know, if you're going to buy Windex to clean the front door, that would actually just be a maintenance expense. So anything that is going to last less than a year would be a maintenance expense and can be written off right on the first year. Okay. So we hear this word lease, and we also hear this term rent. Okay, so what's the difference? A lease would be something that happens for a year or longer. Okay, so leases are really used a lot in the commercial real estate realm because a lot of times your tenant is going to be there for a long time. Okay, and the lease is the biggest driver of what's called net operating income. Now, this term we are going to use a ton in this video, but obviously it allows you to, it is the biggest contributor to your bottom line or to how much income you make, okay? And really on the commercial side, it is the real driver on what your real estate value will be, okay? Your real estate value, and we'll go over the calculations, is driven by your net operating income. Okay. On the on the residential side, the value of your real estate is valued by the comparables of other real estate with kind of similar locations and characteristics. Okay. And that's the big difference between commercial and residential is that with commercial real estate, they're treating it as a business, meaning it's only valued by how much the business makes. On the residential, it's built on how much your property is worth compared to others. Okay. So, what you're going to find when you start thinking about this is that the quality of your lease and the quality of your tenants is what really drives your real estate value. And the amount that you will earn per hour per headache. And we've talked about this in other videos, but if you aren't talking about how many headaches they're going to be, you're not really figuring out the true value of a deal. So, for example, am I going to get called about a toilet breaking on a weekend when I'm traveling? That definitely is a headache, okay? Am I going to have someone smoking in my $500,000 investment and ruin it in the sake of an hour or two, okay? And so the quality of your tenants are really, really important to okay? Think about. So the best tenants for most, just regular commercial real estate investors are government agencies that are going to sign 25-year leases and are going to pay top dollar. And no matter what the economy is like, they're going to just continue to pay you, okay? Major national retailers, think about Starbucks, think about, McDonald's, think about anyone else who would, AT&T, those, T-Mobile, those types of national retailers. It's very tough for them to go out of business from one day to the next, and they would usually sign longer term leases. Think about Walgreens, things like that, okay? And major medical offices, okay? It's very rare that a hospital is going to get up and leave and go find another hospital. How often are they going to be looking for another building to use? No, it's very, very tough for them to move, okay? So I can't emphasize this enough, and there's just a couple of things in this presentation that are highlighted, but when you start thinking about this, if the quality of our tenants is what's so important, the magic of open and affordable dental is that we are able to get a very, very high quality tenant and that the corporate or PSG entity guarantees that that tenant will occupy our real estate for a very long time. And really, it can create a situation where it allows us to have the ability to retire just after one deal. Okay. I always think about, if I was just a regular real estate investor, the second that you get into looking at the deal, you're looking at your tenant because basically the value is on the tenant. And think about the stress that it would cause if your tenant leaves. You've got to find another tenant, and maybe you go a year without any income. And maybe your building is really set up for one kind of a tenant, and then that's the only type of person you can get. So it's very, very stressful for most, and basically their biggest skill is being able to lease out spaces that are unoccupied. But for us, we have the tenant, and we have a very, very good tenant that has a huge incentive to take care of our property and make it look the best as possible. Do our open and affordable dental offices, do they have an incentive to let garbage collect around the building? Do they have an incentive to let the grass just just completely grow without cutting it? Do they have an incentive to have abandoned cars in the parking lot? No. They have an incentive to make it look the best that they can. And to me, that's what is the magic of open and affordable, and the real estate component is that we get this amazing tenant. Okay. So again, lease versus rent. Rent would be something shorter term, usually for a year or less. Okay. Now in commercial real estate, there is the base rent. Okay. So that's the set amount that you're going to collect on a yearly or monthly rate, and it's going to be collected every single month. Okay. And that is before either the double net or the triple net expenses. Okay. So that's just your base rate. Okay. Inside of most commercial rentals is a yearly, or sometimes it happens every 5 years, but a rent bump or increase. And so it's basically in the contract that every year it's going to increase by 3%, or every 5 years it's going to increase by 10%. But that is built in that it will be increasing. Okay. The other thing to understand too is with commercial real estate, everything is basically on a square foot basis, on a per square foot base. Okay, so they actually even use this PSF designator, which is per square foot. Okay, so really, when you see a lease in commercial real estate, they're going to talk to you about, yeah, it is $20 per square foot. And what that really means is it's $24 per square foot per year. Okay. So on a 2,000 square foot building, $24 per square foot would be $24 times 2,000 square feet equals $48,000 per year. So per month, it would be about 4,000 per month. So just understand, very foreign for residential renters, which most of us started out being, to understand this concept of what's $24 per square. What does that actually mean? So it's 24 times the amount of square feet, and that's for the entire year. Okay. One other important concept is this floor area ratio. So it measures basically the building's floor area in relation to the size of the entire parcel. Okay. And it's good to kind of dial that in, because let's say that you are super in need of parking. Well, you want that floor area ratio to not be so big that there's no parking in the entire area. Okay. But it's also like, do you really want it to be so small and you've got all of this parking and potentially all this landscaping that you have to do? So it's kind of good to evaluate what type or how much the building actually occupies of the entire lot size. Okay. Parking ratio, very, very important. Okay. So the parking ratio is basically an amount that every square 1,000 square feet of rentable area is going to have a certain amount of parking assigned to that. Okay. So let's say in a big, huge professional building, and let's say that it's 100,000 square feet and you're renting 2,000 of those square feet. Well, let's say that there's, 40 spots. Well, you are going to be assigned a certain number of those parking spots per 1,000 square feet that you rent. So let's say that you're assigned 4 parking spots and you rent 2,000 square feet. Well, then you are essentially going to get two times or 2 parking spots per 1,000 square feet. So again, for us as dental offices, we need to understand that, if we're going to run 6 operatories, we need, let's say, just eight parking spots for the staff, and let's say another the eight for the patients. Okay, so we're going to need 16 parking lots. So you need to take all of those numbers and calculate, hey, am I going to have 16 parking lots? And unfortunately, there's been a lot of deals that I just haven't been able to do, because it's like, oh, this is a great 3,000 square foot building, plenty of space for this amazing dental office, but there's only 4 parking spots. And it's just like, it's just not going to work. There's just no way for me to run an efficient office with that. So it's very important. One of the things that I always tell doctors: go out and look at the parking spots. Where are they located? How many of them are there? Because just like everything else in real estate, it's like the size of things get real small when you're actually in there. I mean, I wish I could have space for 40 operatories. Do I have that space? No, I always have too little space. A lot of times I'm like, oh shoot, I don't even have enough space for a storage area. And parking spots are super, super important. Okay. I talked about this concept of rent roll. So the seller agent is usually going to publish the rent roll to you, which is basically just the list of all of the rents and how basically when the lease started, when the lease ends, how much the rent is. Is it a triple net lease? Is it a double net lease? Is it a gross lease? And then also, what are the yearly bumps and things like that. So it's important to take the rent roll and put it into the deal evaluator so that you can get the monthly rent down here. And then that translates into the net operating income that then gets translated into the building value. Okay. All right. So let's talk about this net operating income. So net operating income shows the profitability of your income generating real estate investments. Okay. NOI, or net operating income, is mostly used in real estate. Okay, you're going to hear this term all over the place once you start getting into this. Okay, NOI is a before tax figure on the property's income and cash flow statement. Okay, but you have to understand that NOI does not include principal and interest payments on loans, meaning it does not include the mortgage payment that you have. Okay, so it's basically based off of, if you had cash in your account, let's say $5 million, and you're going to buy a $5 million property, you're going to buy it all with cash, and then from there, how much am I going to make? So it does not include your mortgage payment. Okay. So it's very important to understand this NOI, because it's going to drive this hugely important simplistic calculation that really drives everything. Okay. The next thing, and I'm kind of getting you ready for this formula, but the next item in this formula is called the capitalization rate, or the cap rate. Okay. So the cap rate is usually a rate that you're going to assign, and it's usually based off of kind of a region and maybe a property type. But really, the cap rate is a risk-free rate. Let's say, if you took your money and you put it in treasury bonds for the United States government, let's say that they're going to give you 5%. Okay. You don't have to think about toilets. You don't have to think about roofs. You don't have to think about water repairs. You are just sitting back and bringing in money every single month and no care in the world. Okay. With real estate, there's an added risk to things. Obviously, you can have toilets break, you can have water leaks, you can have roof repairs, you can have hail damage. And so there's a little premium on top of the risk-free rate that is included in this cap rate. Okay. cap rates are usually lower where investors think that appreciation is going to be higher. And usually that happens in the coastal areas of the United States. Okay. So if you look at the cap rate of somewhere in Los Angeles versus the cap rate somewhere in Illinois, the cap rate that real estate essentially is calculated on in California is much lower than in Illinois. For example, in California, they might think about 3% cap rates, whereas in Illinois, they might think about 10% cap rates. So it's just important to understand that it's basically as close as you can get to, fire and forget or invest and forget type of incomes. In California, you're thinking, well, I might not be getting as much money because of certain things, but it doesn't matter because my property value is always going up at a high rate. Okay. And then you could say, well, in Illinois, unfortunately, my real estate value isn't going up that much, but I'm getting a lot of cash flow. So it kind of ends up the same there. Okay. So investors usually care more about appreciation than cash flow. Why? Because appreciation is not taxed where cash flow is. Okay. So, in areas where the cap rate is low, investors, so you're usually going to get kind of your higher dollar investors in low cap rate areas because those investors don't want to be taxed. Okay. Whereas when you're starting off, you do care about cash flow, and cash is more important than appreciation. And so those investors kind of congregate to areas where there's higher cap rates. Okay. So this real estate value formula is super, super important. Okay. Now, I'm going to kind of explain this and then obviously understand that as you move these particular essentially parameters around the calculation, this is all the same formula. Okay, it's just with the parameters moved around. So I've created these three equations, basically isolating one parameter at a time. Okay, so the first one is the net operating income equals your real estate value times your capitalization rate. Okay, so if you have real estate valued at $1 million and your cap rate is 8%, you can kind of expect that if you bought that thing at with cash, $1 million, every single year your net operating income would be $80,000. Okay, so you take home $80,000. Okay. Now, what we can do is we can reformulate that formula and we can say, if that's the case, then our real estate value equals the NOI divided by the cap rate. Now, this one is used a ton on like YouTube videos and things like that for people that are like trying to show how great they are at underwriting a deal. So they'll say, hey, if I have an NOI of 80,000 and my cap rate is 8%, what is my real estate value? And so it's just a real easy calculation, NOI, and I'll go ahead and do this here on the calculator. But if our NOI was 80,000 and we divide it by 0.08, there we go. There's our value of our property, okay? So that is very, very important because let's just go to the last one, then we'll kind of talk about the importance, okay? So the capitalization rate thus would be the NOI divided by the real estate value, okay? Now going back to that second equation is, so how can we control our real estate value, okay? The easiest way to control our real estate value is by modifying our NOI because the capitalization rate doesn't really change in an area very frequently, okay? So if we think about it, if we bought a building, okay, and let's say the NOI was 80,000, okay, and then our cap rate was 8%, our building would be worth $1 million, okay? Let's say that we were able to find some way to increase our NOI to 100,000. How would we do that? Maybe we're renting out a vacant area, maybe we're, doing some value add type of things so that we can increase the lease. Maybe we're simply just rewriting the lease on their next expiration, and we now make the NOI at 100,000. We now divide it by our cap rate, and now we have just made the value of our real estate worth $250,000 more simply by increasing our NOI by 20,000, which that's per year, right? So 20,000 divided by 12. So if we can make our NOI go up by $1,600 a month, we've now essentially made 250,000 in appreciation, which obviously is not taxed. So this NOI becomes very, very important for us to increase our real estate value. Now, like we said up here, everything in commercial real estate is by square foot, okay? So these NOI and real estate value calculations, I try to boil down to per square foot, okay? So let's say that we have a lease that basically is $24 per square foot and our cap rate is 8%. That would make our building worth $300 per square foot, okay? Again, if we are able to increase that rent to $30 per square foot divided by our cap rate, now our building is worth $375 per square foot. So always in commercial real estate, try to go down back to that per square foot calculation, okay? So the difference between, commercial and residential real estate comes down to your tenant, okay? And, obviously if you've been watching YouTube, you're going to hear a lot about, multifamily residential real estate, and you don't hear as much on the commercial side, okay? A lot of beginning investors really don't get into commercial right away because it's a little bit harder to get into commercial because you're not as familiar with it as, let's say a high school graduate, okay? The other thing too is that with commercial real estate, it usually takes a higher level of essentially relationships with tenants. It's very tough for, a high school student who's just getting into real estate to go and, approach AT&T and say, hey, do you want to be my tenant? Versus, if a high school student bought a $100,000, trailer house in the Midwest, there's a bunch of people that they could go in and approach to rent their real estate, okay? With commercial real estate, obviously the quality of the tenant is much higher than with residential real estate. The other thing too is with commercial real estate, the depreciation usually is over 39 years, whereas with residential real estate, the depreciation is usually over 27 and a half. So what has always attracted me to commercial real estate is the ability to take very undervalued properties, put in a quality tenant, and literally double the value of that property overnight. Versus with residential real estate, you're really just trying to, work the occupancy rate game and trying to get the best tenant in there so that they don't devalue your property so that you don't have to go in there and fix it up between renters, okay? And then obviously the churn or the churn of your tenants in residential real estate is very high compared to commercial. So a couple other terms here is return on investment or ROI. You hear that all of the time. And it basically is how much profit am I getting or return am I getting on my investment divided by the amount that I put in, okay? The internal rate of return is basically the yearly ROI. So how much am I going to make every single year off of my investment? Okay. Net present value is a super, super important way of measuring basically two different types of things. Okay, so let's say it's just as simple as this. Two income streams. Okay, let's say that one income stream is paying you $1,000 a month for the next 50 years. Okay, and then the other income stream is paying you $2,000 a month, or let's say $3,000 a month for the next 17 years. Well, how am I going to say which one is worth more to me today? And that's why we use something called the net present value. It allows us to evaluate two different opportunities in today's dollars. So it includes an income stream. It also includes a discount amount so that you can compare apples to apples on two things that don't really compute just looking at them at face value. Okay. Cash on cash return is different than your ROI in that cash on cash really takes into account leverage or the amount of other people's money that you're putting into the deal. So if you were able to put $1 down and get a property that is worth $1 million and that property gave you $100,000 a year, that's going to be an amazing cash on cash return. So cash on cash returns, a lot of people like to look at that, but understand that a lot of these amazing cash on cash returns are ways to get into highly leveraged deals. And so it looks like these returns are super amazing. But again, with leveraged deals, you're going to be getting into more risk. Okay. So with carrying costs, obviously that's the cost to carry the asset or hold the asset and the amount that it's going to cost you to essentially pay the mortgage. Okay. It's very important to include carrying costs on an investment because especially with commercial real estate, if you buy a deal and you have to, create the dental office, it's going to take you 8 months to a year to actually occupy it for the first time. And so that needs to be included in the calculations on return on investment and what you're going to write your lease for or what you're going to sell the internal practice for. Okay. So leverage obviously is the total amount of debt financing on a property relative to its current value. Okay. So a highly leveraged property would have a lot of debt compared to its current value. A low leveraged property would have very little debt. So obviously everyone is always talking about debt and equity, and a lot of times now people are saying, well, there's going to be debt and equity in this, and how am I going to go get the debt, and how am I going to go get the equity? Okay, so the debt is the amount owed to another entity for the property that you're acquiring. Okay, and it's usually in the form of a mortgage. It can be, we're going to talk about seller financing, but it's not always the bank who is lending you the money. It can be the seller who's lending you the money. Okay. And then equity is the value of the property not owed to another entity. So, your equity potentially goes up over time as you pay down the principal on the loan. Okay. So, obviously there's a loan to value or an LTV. This is used a lot by banks to understand, they're going to go out and do an appraisal, or they're going to use your NOI calculations to say, okay, what's our risk on this side if we're the ones that are providing the debt on this deal? What safety net do we have if unfortunately we have to take over the property? Can we go out and unload it for more than what the loan is? So another thing too is cash out refinancing. Cash out refinancing is super important in that it is a way for real estate investors to go out and get cash from essentially the equity inside of our building, okay, or our property. So a lot of times what happens is a property owner will wait for the principal to be paid down, and then they'll go out and say, hey, I have a building worth $2 million. I only owe $1 million on it. I can go out and get a loan up to 80% of LTV. So I can go out and get cash out for $600,000. And so I will owe 80% of this property will be debt. 20% will be equity, but you'll have $600,000, which this is not a taxable event. You did not sell the property. You literally get a check from the bank for the $600,000 that you can use to buy other properties. Now, the issue is can you go and just spend it on, vacations and things like that? You can, but you need to keep using that money to buy other properties. If not, there's a potential of it being taxed in a different way than if you used it on properties. Okay. So cash out refinances are really the way that people try to hyper grow their nest egg of investment properties so that they can take that 600,000 and go and buy another property. Okay. There is a whole kind of a whole type of real estate or way of financing real estate that is called creative financing. And this is very, very popular on YouTube and Instagram. But it's essentially a way for you to acquire, or in a better word would be to control real estate without going to a traditional bank to get the money to pay off the seller. So creative financing are all of these different ways to try to get either the seller or other people involved so that you can control the property and get access to the depreciation and the other expenses to essentially reduce your earned income. Okay. So with the creative financing, they always talk about terms. Okay. So terms are basically all of the variables used in determining the payoff of the debt on the property. Okay. So that would include the interest rate, the number of payments, and the initial loan value. So, you can set your terms to whatever you want. So for essentially traditional financing, let's say that a typical mortgage is a 30-year fixed here in the United States. Okay. With creative financing, you could set it up that you would pay it off over 50 years. So it's really a way for the buyer and seller to meet and say, hey, what is the best deal for both of us so that, the net present value of this income stream is the best for both of us, and the tax consequences on both sides is as favorable as possible versus just the traditional, essentially cookie cutter of a 30-year mortgage. Okay. So with creative financing, it's very important to understand the difference between deed and title. Okay. So with title, let's go ahead and go over that. With title, you need to understand that title is essentially a substitute word for ownership. Okay. So it conveys how the property is owned. Okay. A deed, on the other hand, is a legal instrument and a physical document that conveys the ownership or the title or interest in the real property from one person to the other. Okay. So when you buy a house, you will get the deed. Okay. The piece of paper is called the deed. And title will show you how you own the property. Okay. So if you think about it, title companies are essentially ownership companies, and they allow basically the transfer of deeds, and they record that in the proper places so that people know who owns the property. Okay. With deeds, there's a lot of different types of deeds, and I'll let you kind of read through these, but they're basically just legal documents that allow a paper trail of who this property was transferred from. And they kind of make some guarantees on what exactly has happened and who owns this and things like that. So kind of read through the general warranty deeds, the specialty warranty deeds, the bargain or sale deed, the confirmation deed, deed of trust, deed in lieu of foreclosure. Okay. So since the deed is tangible, it transfers the title or the ownership from the seller, commonly referred to as the grantor, to the buyer, otherwise known as the grantee. So the grantee will receive the title to the property or the ownership of the property and the associated deed at the closing phase of the home buying journey or the commercial real estate journey. Okay. So we talked about seller financing as one of the types of creative financing where you're transferring title or ownership from the seller to the buyer with or without recording the sale to the county in which it resides. Okay. So the seller may hold on to the original mortgage and even take payments from the buyer at the same or different terms from the original mortgage. So there's a lot of ways to do creative financing or seller financing where you actually don't record that the sale took place to the county office. And so you're basically, in a sense, trying to not alert the original mortgage holder that the property was sold, even though there was a mortgage tied to that particular physical asset. Okay. Again, seller financing, there's a lot of videos out there on it, but it's super important to kind of understand that there's more than just the traditional cookie cutter way of acquiring assets. Okay. We talked about amortization schedules. Okay. And that is basically a table that lists each monthly payment from the time you start repaying the loan until the loan matures. When we look at the amortization schedule on this particular property, you can see that it has the date, it has the beginning balance, it has the interest paid on every payment and the principal, and then the ending balance. Okay, and you can see over time as you pay down your principal, obviously the interest is less and the principal paid off every single month is more. Okay. Now, when an important tax implication here is called the property cost basis. Okay. So when you sell a property, okay, you are going to pay capital gains on the amount of your sale price minus your basis. Okay. Now, obviously, your basis is going to go up or down depending on if you've had capital expenditures. If you do a capital expenditures, your basis goes up. If you depreciate it, your basis goes down. Okay. So the important thing to understand is that if you do, like we talked about, straight line depreciation of your asset over its useful life, what will happen is if you went to sell that property, you would have a big capital gain because your basis is down to zero. You're also going to see what makes this happen, what makes things happen with this too, is when an asset is completely depreciated, okay, let's say in commercial real estate after 39 years, your ability to reduce income through depreciation is gone. So a lot of times there's less incentive to hold on to that property. And so you're going to see a lot of buildings that are 39 years old getting sold because the owner wants to get new depreciation. Okay. Now the problem is that, okay, so I sell it and then I get new depreciation, but I have to pay a huge capital gains tax. One way in the United States, and I don't think that this is available in any other country, I know it's not available in Canada, but there is something called a 1031 exchange, which basically says that if you exchange two properties, okay, within a certain amount of time, I believe it's 60 days, you are able to not pay capital gains, or it's not pay capital gains. You are going to defer paying those capital gains until in the future, and it's basically indefinitely. Like you could literally do 1031 exchanges throughout your entire life and have all of this capital gains ready to be taken. And if you can't get into a 1031 exchange, then the tax bill becomes due. So that's why a lot of properties are are sold or put on the market because it's like, hey, if there's some desperate buyer that's coming in and needs a property within 60 days, they're willing to pay whatever because they just need to park their money in a property, okay? So a 1031 exchange is a way to defer your capital gains tax, and very, very useful way of deferring taxes, okay? So one other concept here is a stepped up basis, okay? So we talked about, okay, let's say that someone is 40 years old, they buy a commercial property that is worth $1 million 40 years ago. By the time they retire, or by the time they're 80 years old, it is now worth $4 million, okay? Now, if they sold it at 80 while they're still alive, they would pay a capital gains. Let's say that their basis went down to zero. They would pay capital gains on $4 million. So on a $4 million sale, let's say that they have to pay 20% in capital gains, they would have to pay $800,000. One other way of getting out of paying those capital gains, besides the 1031 exchange, is to wait until you die. If you die and you pass that property on to your heirs or your estate, they get a stepped up basis, meaning they inherit it at the market value on the day that you die. Okay. So now their basis is now $4 million, and they can immediately start depreciating it at $4 million down over the next 40 years down to zero. Okay. So it becomes you're going to see this, that it is so advantageous to pass on this real estate to your heirs, because the day before you die, it's an $800,000 tax bill. The day after you die, it's a huge depreciation windfall for the next 39 years, okay? And so, like I had said at the very beginning, you're going to start to see how that real estate in the United States and in other countries to a lesser extent, real estate is the most supercharged tax savings bank account that is inflation resistant or inflation proof that you can ever invent. In fact, the more that you kind of unwind what's actually going on here, real estate is, yeah, it's a little bit used for cash flow. It's, it's even used for, appreciation and value add and even principal pay down. But the big winners here are essentially tax advantages, and tax advantages are really the way that you're going to make a lot of your money, because even with cash flow, once you get a property that's completely paid off, it doesn't really make sense to have this crazy cash flow and have to pay taxes on that, when you can literally go out and do cash out refi, get more interest expense against your income, and take that big chunk of money and go invest it into a ginormous real estate savings account. Okay. And the thing that I've always felt is, if you could simply get into $100 million worth of real estate in 20 years, which is usually the mortgage term for commercial real estate, it's going to be all paid off. And you will essentially have equity of $100 million. So it's basically just a race to get into as much real estate as you can handle. And then in 20 years, your net worth will be the value of the real estate that you were able to get into. So just be very, very calculating and curious about all of the trajectories and the true mechanism of what real estate is. Okay. So we talked about depreciation schedules. Okay. So, it charts the loss in value of an asset, the building, not the land, over the period that you've designated as its useful life. So using the accounting method that you've chosen. Okay. So the Internal Revenue Service defines the following depreciation schedule. So for commercial real estate, it's 39 years, okay? So banks define commercial real estate as any commercial real estate or any residential real estate over 5 doors or 5 units, okay? With residential real estate, this is basically any place where people live, but it can be 4 doors or less, okay? With residential real estate, they depreciate it over 27 and a half years for IRS calculations, okay? So we talked about this. Straight line depreciation is an asset that's depreciated equally throughout that useful life of the asset, okay? Accelerated depreciation, okay? Well, let me just talk about this cost segregation, okay? So if you imagine a certain building, it's made up by a bunch of different parts. Obviously, it's the roof, it's the walls, it's the light fixtures, it's the plugs on the wall, it's the flooring, and all of this kind of stuff, okay? So a cost segregation, what it does is it's you go into a building and you study the building and you basically put all of the different items listed out, and each item has its own depreciation schedule. So, for example, a light fixture is not going to last 39 and a half years. It's usually going to last less, okay? The carpet is not going to last 39 and a half or 39 years. The roof, not going to last that much. Now the exterior walls, they're going to last 39 years. So you put all of these different costs and you segregate them and you strategically plan and create essentially an accelerated depreciation of certain of those sub assets, okay? So by segregating a property into its parts like the electrical system, carpets, and landscaping, investors can depreciate these elements over shorter lives, leading to a more significant deduction in the earlier years, okay? So that's essentially accelerated depreciation. With accelerated depreciation, you're going to have larger depreciation expenses in the early years of the asset's life, and you're going to have less depreciation at the later end of the asset's useful life, okay? Now, why is that important, okay? Usually, your prime investing years are, let's say, between 30 and 60 years old, okay? So during those high income, earned income years, you are really trying to reduce that income. And the way that you're going to try to do that is by accelerating the depreciation into those high earned income years. When you're 80 years old, your income is not as high, you're not working as hard, and so having a lower depreciation expense when you're 80 years old is better versus those high income earning years, okay? So again, we're front loading the depreciation with accelerated depreciation. In 2018, there was this law that you could even further accelerate depreciation expenses all into the first year. So in just normal accelerated depreciation, they basically categorized them into assets that have a useful life of 5 years, some that have 7 years, some that have 15 years, and then obviously some that have 39 years. With bonus depreciation, they are allowing, in this started in 2022, but they would allow 100% of all of those 5, 7, and 15-year assets to be immediately depreciated on their first year. Okay, so there were massive depreciation expenses on the first year, offsetting earned income. So in a sense, too, obviously the tax system is an incentive program, but it created this frenzy of investors trying to, or earned income investors, to try to acquire assets so they could immediately offset their earned income with this high depreciation. Now, this bonus depreciation is scaling down until the year 2027, and you're not going to be able to front load that first year with all of these depreciation expenses, okay? Now, does that mean that you're not going to be able to take the depreciation? No, you're absolutely going to be able to take all the depreciation. It's just not going to happen all on the first year. Okay. So I just kind of made a little comparison of, certain depreciations. Let's say that we have a $100,000 asset with bonus depreciation. For example, you could take $42,000 on your first year and depreciate that. And if you qualified, you could offset your earned income by 42,000 the first year that your real estate was in operation, okay? And then from then on, it would just be a straight line $1,500 per year. And if you total all of that throughout the life of the asset, it's $100,000. With accelerated depreciation, you can see it's 10,000 and then it drops down to 5,000 and then it's 1,250, okay? But in the end, it's still the 100,000, okay? And then the straight line depreciation is just the 2,500 from here on out, okay? You can understand that if year one you were 30, let's say that you were 40 years old and you had a high income, that would be amazing. And you don't care when you're 80 that you're only going to have $1,500, okay? Versus, something like this where, you're not getting that great of a depreciation expense when you're a 40-year-old and you're still getting the same amount when you're 80 when you don't really care as much about your depreciation expense. So I've talked about this, but there's basically two ways to offset your earned income with passive income losses, okay? So like we said, depreciation is a non-cash or a phantom loss. It doesn't really exist. You didn't actually lose that money. And it can be used to, in a sense too, is, in one sense you could say, yeah, my depreciation is basically saying my building is becoming less valuable, but we all know that our building against the US dollar is becoming more valuable. So it's really like the IRS is thinking that your building is going down in value and they're allowing you to take the loss between last year's value and your new basis. But in reality, the actual cash value of your real estate is going up. So it's kind of like a double whammy. So it can be used to offset active income from W-2 or other earned income, okay? So the two ways that you can qualify to use depreciation against active income is either short-term rentals, okay? A short-term rental is deemed a rental activity if the average stay is 7 days or less. So think about your Airbnbs, okay? So why did Airbnbs become so popular? It's because it was one of the ways that the IRS allowed high-income earners to offset their earned income, okay? Now, there's obviously some other rules around that, and because this presentation isn't really about, how to do Airbnbs, there's some qualifications on what really, what you have to do to qualify as a short-term rental. You have to be the manager. You have to be the one that sets up the appointments and, sets up the people cleaning and all this kind of stuff. Again, a lot more management intensive than a long-term commercial real estate tenant, okay? So the other way to be able to offset or to use depreciation expense against your earned income is by gaining this real estate professional status or REPS, okay? So it's an official designation acknowledged by the IRS for individuals that are substantially engaged in real property trades or businesses. In other words, the real estate industry, okay? So let's go over these 4 rules, okay? They are very, very important to understand because you have to qualify and be absolutely sure that you are not found by the IRS to be violating these and strip your rep status, okay? So the 50% rule is this. 50% of you and again, here's the yellow, or your spouse's professional time must be in active real estate, okay? So if you work and have a ton of earned income, let's say that you are a neurosurgeon and you make $1 million a year and your spouse is a stay-at-home spouse and they spend at least 50% of their time in active real estate, all of your combined depreciation expense can be used to offset your active income. Okay. The second rule is that one of the two of you must spend at least 750 hours of you or your spouse's time must be in real estate in which you materially participate. Okay. Meaning, does that mean looking for properties? It does not qualify. It means participating in actively managing your real estate. Are you going out there and arranging for the repairs? Are you collecting the rent? Are you dealing with the tenants? That is actively or materially participating in your real estate. So you'll I'll have you kind of look into that more and be very versed on this material participation rule. Okay, so you must actively be involved in real estate. Now, there's these things called syndication where a bunch of investors get together and there's this general partner and limited partners, and usually you're the limited partner. There's this one person that actively manages it. Okay, those do not qualify for this rep status. Okay, so all of your money could be in syndications, but it's not going to trickle down so that you can take the depreciation expense against your active income. Okay. The other rule is the 5% rule. So just because you work in real estate doesn't mean that you're going to be able to get the rep status. You must own 5% or more of the business to count towards the 750 hours. Okay. So again, it's very important that you satisfy these 4 rules in order for you to be designated a real estate professional status and then start using your depreciation expense against your active income. Okay. So again, you need to talk with your accountant about this. And a lot of times accountants, unfortunately, are not as versed on this stuff as you probably are now. Okay. So how do you make money in commercial? How do you really make money in commercial real estate? The way to make money in real estate is to buy a building and increase its NOI by signing leases that make it a higher value. You then cash out, refinance 80% of your loan to value and pay no taxes, or you sell it in a 1031 exchange. Okay. So the the chart below I'm going to show you is a way for you to kind of understand when you go in and look at a property, is it better for you to lease it or to buy it? Okay. So obviously consideration needs to be made on whether you have rep status, because if you have rep status, obviously that skews the whole calculation on you buying things, because then you can take that depreciation expense. If you don't have rep status, the purchase is a little less attractive because you're not going to get the depreciation expense against your active income. Obviously, you're still going to have the depreciation expense, but it's going to go against your passive income, okay, or your unearned income, okay? So, a rough estimate, if you have rep status, ownership is going to be worth 30% more than if you didn't have rep status, okay? So I just have some, leases per square foot, some cap rates. Let's say that this is California, Colorado, and Illinois, okay? And you can see the different values per square foot with those different cap rates, okay? The other thing you can say is, okay, so let's say that I bought this place and I increased the NOI per square foot to $35 a square foot. Well, then my property is worth $583 in California, $438 in California, and $350 in Illinois. Okay. So it's just really important to look at this and be like, oh, okay, all I got to do is figure out how to increase my NOI, and then I know the value of my practice. Now, when I was doing a cash out refi on one of my properties, the real or the appraiser asked me for my leases. And then when the property valuation came back, it was exactly to the penny my triple net lease, which is the way to really take your NOI, a triple net lease is very much equivalent to an NOI, and then you can extrapolate your real estate value right off of that. So that's why we really encourage triple net leases on the landlord side, because it allows you to easily calculate your NOI, reduce your risk, and really control your real estate value. Okay. So how do we increase our NOI? In the dental space, the easiest way to increase our NOI is to be able to increase our leases or the value of our leases or the number of our leases. Okay. So imagine being able to increase your NOI by $1 at an 8% cap rate. Okay. So let's do the calculations here. If we take $1 divided by 0.08, we have now created $12.50 in added real estate value. Okay. So imagine being able to bring in an orthodontist and an oral surgeon who would gladly sign a yearly lease with you for $50,000 each. That's $100,000 in NOI or $1.25 million in added real estate value the day that those leases are signed. Okay. And that's why I'm so keen on having the relationships with these specialists, because by simply signing those leases, you are increasing the value of your office. Okay. And guess how much taxes you have to pay on that? You don't have to pay any taxes on that increase in value. Okay. So just by signing the specialist to your GP offices, you have created tax-free real estate value that has made you a millionaire. You literally are a millionaire if you can sign a GP and an orthodontist to come in. Okay. Better yet, you can instantly take those leases to the bank and withdraw 80% of that in the form of cash out refinance, totaling $1 million. And that is how you grow your empire quickly. Okay. So you take that $1 million and you go out and you buy another property. You do the exact same thing, rinse and repeat, and then at the end of it, you cash out refi. As soon as you can get to $100 million in, or whatever your goal is, $20 million, $10 million, $5 million, $1 million, whatever it is, $1 billion of real estate, all you have to do is just wait 20 years and that'll be your net worth. Okay. And that is why the value of specialists cannot be understated. Okay. So the best deals in real estate. Okay. How are we going to get into these deals? Okay. Through experience. I'll just put out the most recent experience here in 2024, which was Littleton West and Centennial. You can usually purchase, let's say, just a regular building with parking for $100 to $300 per square foot. Okay. Yes, I understand that you can buy some for $500 per square foot, blah, blah, blah. Okay. But your goal is what is the total cost of your real estate going to be? Okay. So on average, between Centennial and Littleton, and this is including all of the equipment, all of the cotton rolls, everything so that someone could walk in with a certificate of occupancy and literally sit down and start doing dentistry, it's going to cost you $400 to $500 per square foot. So if you add the 400 plus the 100, you're going to get 500. If you do the 500 plus the 300, you're going to get 800. So all in, you're going to spend between $500 to $800 per square foot to get a functioning dental office. Okay. So when you look at that, now you're able to say, walk into a building and be like, oh, this building has a dental office and it's $300 a square foot. Oh my goodness, I couldn't build that for that cheap. Okay. Or you walk into a space and it's like, yeah, this is $850 per square foot. No way, I could build it for less than that. Okay. Or you can also, through the NOI calculation, come in and figure out, okay, so this triple net lease is, let's say, $24,000 a year at an 8% cap rate, okay? So they want me to pay, let's say, okay, let's do this, $24 a square foot times a 2,000 square foot building, and it's a triple net lease. So their NOI is 48,000. We're in an 8% cap rate area, so this building is worth 600,000 bucks. Okay. Now, if you're like, okay, and it's worth, and we're looking at 2,000 square feet, so excuse me, 600,000 divided by 200 or 2,000 square feet, we're looking at $300 a square foot. So they are leasing this building to me at a valuation of $300 a square foot. That's kind of on the low end of what Dr. Stott was saying, because he was saying to be able to build this, it's going to cost me $500. So this is actually a pretty good lease. I don't mind that $300 lease, right? But let's say that, you're getting a valuation where they're like, yeah, it's going to be $40 a square foot times 2,000 square feet, $80,000 in NOI divided by 0.08. That's $1 million building divided by 2,000 square feet. That's $500 a square foot. That's kind of more in the range of, where Dr. Stott said it was a little bit more fair. So again, now you have the tools to be able to evaluate if lease terms are good or not. Okay. Now, just kind of an aside on cap rates versus the terms or the interest rate that you can get on a mortgage. Think of it this way, okay? If a normal cap rate is at 10% and you are able to get a mortgage at 7.5%, you are going to be able to arbitrage that 2.5%, and you're going to make 2.5% on your money, okay? Now, if the cap rate is at 6%, but you're only able to get a mortgage at 8%, then you're going to be losing that 2%. So you're going to always want to reduce your interest expense or your interest rate and try to get that below your pro forma cap rate so that you can arbitrage that between your lease, your tenant, and your bank, okay? So obviously various strategies exist for selling your practice or keeping the building or keeping your practice, but we're gonna kind of talk about, let's take the practice out of the equation and let's concentrate on just keeping the building, okay? Since this is mostly just about the real estate side, okay? So, you can either sell the practice as soon as it's completed, okay? You can start it and sell it for a profit and keep some of the royalty, or you can run it until it's at its maximum value and try to sell it for essentially 70% of collections, and you get to keep some or all of the royalty. So obviously, when you're doing the practice, you have to come up with, what is my exit strategy going to be here, and how much time am I willing to put into this deal? And your calculation becomes in like, okay, so if I have to spend another month here and I can double the value, that's great. But I have to spend another 4 years here and I'm only going to increase the value by 15%. Is it really worth my time? Okay. So it's very important for you to understand the trajectory of the value of that practice and where your goal is in selling it. Okay. So again, we can now talk about evaluating deals and leases based on that calculation, okay? So there's different types of ways to get into a deal, okay? And the best deals, as you start to have higher income are, okay, if we can find existing dental office spaces for sale, but without the practice, okay? Because obviously they're going to be trying to sell the practice for a certain amount, okay? So the positives of buying that is you're going to have a lower overall cost than having to buy patients, okay, which is essentially buying a practice. If you have the rep status, you're going to be able to have that depreciation expense against your high income, okay? The negatives, obviously, you're going to have a high initial cost as you have to come up with a certain amount of money to buy the real estate. And then you're also going to have to start a new practice. And so it could be months without cash flow. Okay. The next type of practice that is, or real estate deal that's second in attractability would be a practice for sale that has the real estate. Okay, so it's easier to get to the positive cash flow. With rep status, you are going to have the depreciation expense, but obviously you're going to have to not only buy the real estate, but you're also going to have to buy the practice. So your overall costs are higher. Okay. Lease takeovers are a very cheap way of getting into a practice. Unfortunately, you're not going to get the depreciation expense, okay? Because you're simply just taking over someone's lease for either, and it's mostly just an abandoned practice. And that is, you might have to spend some money to get that place looking like a real office and being able to see patients. And you're spending all of this money inside of someone else's building, which is sometimes a harder hurdle to get over, okay? The next type would be a blank office space, just a shell of a building that you need to go in and either, maybe it's a restaurant, you're going to demo it, and then you're going to make it into a dental office, okay? You can usually find something like this for super cheap because some of these buildings are, they were built for some restaurant that's no longer in business and it has a very weird configuration. And then I would convert it to a dental office, which is what I did in Bennett. Okay. It was a restaurant. I spent a year building it and then I moved over there. Okay. It has a higher overall cost, especially if you don't have another dental practice, because you're going to be waiting so much and you're going to have all those carrying costs until it's ready to go. And then once you actually open for business, then you have another year of trying to make money. Okay. And you're going to be waiting for permits, for construction, and you're trying to get that practice break even, okay? I think the fifth most attractive type of deal would be a practice for sale without the real estate, okay? So obviously you're going to be cash flow positive very quickly, but you don't own the real estate, okay? So a lot of practices that I've bought in the past started out like this because, again, I needed that instant cash flow, okay? So let's kind of begin on, how am I going to look for deals? And we're going to obviously expand this to the entire United States just so that we kind of have, we can evaluate a lot of different things, okay? But if you do a basic search on LoopNet with the keyword dental, it's going to yield all of these properties for sale, okay? Now, obviously, these are not all just like abandoned properties. These are like existing deals that are out there, okay? So I'm just going to give you an example here, which is this Aspen Dental building in Michigan, okay? So this is very common that you're going to get this kind of like a flyer there that will show you, or this offering memorandum that will show you what the deal is kind of made up of, okay? And now you're going to start to see some terms that are now familiar to you that before they're like, I don't know what this means. What's the cap? What's the NOI? Well, guess what? Now we know what those mean, okay? So obviously we're going to kind of have when I look at a deal, I look at kind of the regional traffic and then kind of the local traffic. And, if it's back here in this corner, that's probably not as good as if it was up on the front of this street. And, oh, is this an interstate? Is this a 4-lane highway? How many cars are actually coming by here? So those are all things to kind of look at. What kind of a neighborhood is it in? Those types of things. Is it on the second floor? Is it on the first floor? Are there windows? Are there not windows? Those types of things are super important to look at, okay? So obviously, look at this. We're starting to see some terms that we talked about. Rent roll, okay? Tenants, okay? So we take a look at this and we can see that the price is $4.3 million, okay? And the property is this building here that includes 2 tenants, okay? And we can look here. It looks like there's plenty of parking, things like that, okay? We look here and our NOI is $295,391.60. That's interesting. What is our cap rate? 6.75. So let's pull out our calculator here And let's see if all of this kind of makes sense. So if we take our price times our cap rate, we should get our NOI. So let's take 4,376,200 times 0.0675, enter. Look at that. We are getting our NOI. So it makes you wonder, why are they how are they coming up with that price? Do you think that they went and got comps and looked at other buildings? No. All they did is they took their NOI divided by their cap rate, 295,391.60, divided by 0.0675, and they're like, oh, let's sell this building for 4.3 million. That's what it's worth. Okay. Now, the other thing that you can now, calculate is, okay, so building per square building size. So the building is 4.3 million divided by 8,064. So they're selling this building for $500 a square foot. Okay. Now, obviously we talked about this cap rate of 6.75. The issue becomes is if we can borrow money at 6.75, we probably ought to just go out and get a risk-free return instead of this, unless we need depreciation expense, unless we know that this lease includes yearly bumps, things like that. Okay. So if we look at the investment highlights, we have a newly extended AT&T and Aspen Dental leases. Okay. We have a lot of people within a 3-mile radius, and they're basically trying to sell you on the positives of all this. Okay. You can see that this is in Battle Creek, Michigan. Just initially I'm thinking, okay, what kind of snow removal services am I going to have? What kind of, water damage am I going to have? What's the demographic here? How many people are actually driving by this place? Seems like it's not in a real, it's not next to a major highway here or cross, intersections of major highways. So that's something to keep an eye on. Okay. Then, so obviously we're looking at kind of like the bigger picture here, or the regional picture, and then this is kind of more of the local picture. Obviously, they're going to try to show you that, there's all these, grade A type of tenants that are there close. And, if they made a decision to be there, you should probably make a decision to be there too. Okay. And then obviously we dial in and see again, oh, yes, you're going to be right here next to Walgreens, Walmart, Sam's Club, things like that. So, and then obviously dialing in more, and then you're like, oh, I know exactly where it is. I'm going to be so happy. I'm right next to Chili's and TJ Maxx and, all of these types of things. And I look the other direction, there I am. Okay. So now we kind of get into the nitty gritty. Okay. So we're talking about the Aspen Dental, and we can look at the lease. Okay. So for this space, it's 3,500 square feet. And so what I did is I took this entire deal and I took it to the lease or the deal evaluator. Okay. And you can see that I'm building out the Aspen Dental, the AT&T and the units. And I'm also putting in all of the purchase prices, the loan amounts that I'm kind of assuming, and all of the assumptions here on what my cash flow is going to be. Okay. And, I'm assuming that I'm going to be able to get money for 6.5%. Okay. So when I come back to here, okay, we started off a lease in 2008 and it gets done in 2031. And then here's our base rent. There's the renewal option. After the lease expires, they can renew one for 5 years. And then their rent increases is 5% in 2026, and then 10% on if they take the option to renew, it'll increase by 10%. Okay. Who's responsible for what? The landlord is responsible for replacement costs of the roof, and the costs related to repair and maintenance are reimbursed to the landlord through the common area maintenance. Okay, so if there's common area maintenance, the tenant is essentially responsible for it through the CAM. Okay. Common areas, cap on the controllable CAM expenses increases 5% annually on a cumulative basis. Okay. Who's in charge of the taxes? Tenant, HVAC tenant, insurance tenant, utilities tenant. Again, This is a triple net lease. You can see the main ones are taken on, the responsibility is the tenant, okay? Now, if we look at this second spot here, which is the AT&T, that also is kind of built out, okay? Again, this is another triple net lease, which on the deal evaluator, we are calculating that, okay? So here we go. Again, a pro forma. How much should we really, think that this is going to work out? I mean, you can see here's the in-place net operating income. How much would we really trust these numbers? You need to dive into these a lot more because this is given to you by someone who has an incentive to say that your net operating income is as high as possible, okay? Here's your rent roll, okay? There's all of the different parameters there for your rent roll, okay? So they're kind of talking up how amazing their tenants are. Again, the quality of your tenant is really what determines the quality or the price or the value of your real estate. So there we go. Let's just take a look at some of these parameters here. The price is $4.3 million. Building size 8,000 square feet. Price per square foot, we're buying it for $543. Our cap rate is 6.75, and our NOI is $295,000. Okay. Our lessee, it's a triple net lease. Rent increases and bumps. Our second lessee is AT&T, triple net lease. There's no increase in the lease. I kind of went through there and kind of extrapolated that. Lease started in 2008 and will expire in 3 years, and the landlord is responsible for the roof replacement and all HVAC expenses above $1,000 per year. Okay, so we need to calculate that in. The issue becomes is in 4 years, what's going to happen if AT&T does not renew their lease? Obviously, our NOI could drop drastically, and we're stuck with trying to lease out this particular space right here, okay? And there's their rent roll, okay? So let's kind of just take a look at the conclusion. So for the cash flow, only the amount that you can arbitrage between the cap rate and the interest rate. If you can get money for less than the cap rate, you'll make cash flow as long as the expenses stay the same or never go up. The appreciation, active, how much are you really going to be able to put money into a space like this and make it go up in value? It looks pretty clean. And I think that even, with the larger HOA, you're not going to be able to do too much to the exterior of the land, okay? Passive, usually you're going to go up around 3% a year, maybe a little less because this is in the Midwest, okay? Tax savings, absolutely, okay? So if we come to our deal evaluator, you're going to see your ROI on your first year. You're going to probably have a negative cash flow. You are going to have principal pay down, but your tax reduction is absolutely phenomenal. It represents 66% of your entire ROI for that year. Your appreciation is 23%, but your cash flow is actually negative, okay? When you come to, year 2, when that depreciation expense maybe is gone or a lot less, well, your tax reduction falls to 12% instead of 66, and your appreciation becomes the lion's share of your ROI, okay? If we look at it this way, you can see that appreciation is one that really kind of is the deal maker here. Your principal pay down is a good thing, but then it drops off, obviously, after you pay it off. And then your tax reduction falls very drastically as you depreciate this thing off. Your value add is almost negligible. And then your cash flow is actually negative for most of the life until you pay it off, and then it jumps, okay? So that's a graphical representation of how the ROI works, which is super, super important, okay? For sure you'll be able to run a cost segregation analysis and get bonus depreciation and regular depreciation over 39 years. Principal pay down, you'll for sure get the principal pay down over the life of the loan. And again, that's what that chart that we just showed you. So kind of my final thoughts on all of this, and I think, the bigger strategy on open and affordable and why it's such a compelling opportunity for all of us is we need to maximize our compensation per hour per headache, okay? So to reduce taxes, you need to get yourself as much as possible out of the earned income realm into the capital gain realm, okay? So to do this, you need to buy buildings and sell practices when they are not increasing in value as quickly as you want, okay? And the only way to do all of this is through systems. And open and affordable PSG, the practice support group, is really what ties all of this together, okay? Because if you are going to, or all of us, if we're all going to try to guarantee these amazing tenants, we have to guarantee that the tenants have a great reputation. And the only way to guarantee a great reputation is if everyone is following a system. And that's why practice support group is what ties all of this together. In the end, it's not Dr. Stott that holds open and affordable together, because what is going to hold open and affordable together after Dr. Stott dies? It has to be all of us investing into the systems and into the practice support group, which is going to keep our reputation high and is going to keep our tenants in our buildings after we retire and allow us to have these amazing assets that we will depreciate for the next 40 years, have this crazy net worth at the end of our lives, and then pass it on to our estate at a stepped up basis, and our children, grandchildren, or whoever our estate is going to be able to inherit this and immediately get depreciation expense. And this is really how you create multi-generational wealth, is through this, okay? So you're going to see quickly that your loyalty and commitment to improving practice support group and the systems is paramount as they will help you scale and will be the mechanism that ensures your building keeps its high value tenants, positive patient experience, and reputation. We'll only be able to implement this strategy at scale if we can go nationwide. You're seeing that in Colorado, we're starting to bump up against each other because we're running out of territories, okay? So it will require us all to think about managing practices and real estate remotely. You can't run a practice remotely without systems, okay? So the only way to do it is through systems, not by your own personal skills, okay? So we all need to understand that if our in-office protocols does not immediately and significantly add to the whole of PSG and the systems, it detracts from what I believe our goal should be, and what PSG's goal is that we're managing a system to enable all of us to have a very high return per hour per headache. And for me, that's why I only care about systems, and I'm not as interested in this exciting clinical thing or that exciting clinical thing. The only thing that I'm excited about is systems that produce happy patients, that reward tenants, that pay very well to their landlords. So I'm glad that you watched this video. Hopefully you got to the end here, and leave your comments. Send me a private message if you need to on anything that I might have forgotten, and maybe there's an upgrade down the line.